Hey, Seawolf community, Chancellor Sandine here with another segment of Ask a UAA Expert. Take a look.
My name is Maria Williams, and I'm a faculty member in the Departments of Alaska Native Studies and Music at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm going to be addressing the impacts of the 1918 influenza epidemic on the Alaska Native community. What were the impacts of the pandemic of 1918 to the Alaska Native community? The pandemic of 1918, of course, similar to what we're experiencing today, similar but different, because today, of course, we have public health, we have a World Health Organization, we have a lot more mobilization. In 1918, of course, looking at where Alaska was a territory, very remote, and of course, most populations in remote communities are usually the most vulnerable because they haven't built up the antibodies. And the 1918 pandemic was very virulent, and it had very devastating impacts on the Alaska Native community. So, for example, in some communities, 50% or more of the entire population succumbed to this pandemic. It resulted in a high degree of orphaned children. It also resulted in a lot of political restructuring in some cases. So, for example, if one village very close to another one experienced a lot of death, the survivors would move to the next village. So there was a lot of also population shifts and movements. And with me, I'm Tlingit, so my grandmother, my father's mother, her first husband died in this pandemic. And then she remarried, and that's when she married my father's father, my grandfather. But that resulted, of course, in population shifts, clan and lineage lines began to shift. So the repercussions of the pandemic are echoed even today. So major shifts also were that a lot of orphanages that missions had started, for example, the Holy Cross mission outside of the lower Yukon River had a huge uptick in children because most of the children were orphaned because of the loss of their families and their parents. And so this also resulted in a larger population of students going into boarding schools. Were there other epidemics that affected Alaska Native people? The answer, of course, is yes, because epidemics are part of human history. Human beings have been subject to different types of epidemics throughout history. In the 21st century, this is very unusual for us because of public health, because of modern medicine, because of vaccines. We're not used to experiencing this. But if you look, not even going back as far as 1918, but of course prior to that, there were very many different types of epidemics, including smallpox, often considered the scourge of humankind. In Alaska, for example, in 1835 to 1840, there was a smallpox epidemic that wiped out 50% of the entire Alaska Native population. That, again, is another type of epidemic that, has been basically eradicated. World Health Organization did a big global health campaign, and of course we all know there's vaccines. But other types of epidemics that came through, in addition to influenza, scarlet fever, tuberculosis. Alaska Native people have been subject to different waves of epidemics, just like all people have everywhere. However, isolated communities have a tendency to not have built up antibodies to different types of disease, and so in some cases they are a more vulnerable population. What are other good sources if people want to do more research on the impact of epidemic diseases on Alaska Native people? I would recommend two really good sources. One is by Dr. Robert Fortine called Chills and Fevers, and it's actually the history of epidemic disease in Alaska, primarily with the Alaska Native community. Another book I highly recommend is Harold Napoleon's Uyarak, The Way of the Human Being. This Harold's book in particular, he's Yupik, and he particularly addresses the impacts that it had on the spiritual practices of Alaska Native people when they experienced a tremendous loss of population and family members. In fact, in his book he references a 1900 epidemic, and it became a time marker for the Yupik people. But he mentions too that this is a challenging time for the traditional healers and the shamans because their ministrations, their medications did not have effect on some of these unknown diseases. So these had an impact on the spiritual practices. I highly recommend the book, and I'll provide a link for that as well.